This podcast is sponsored by Great White Hot Sauce. It's a small batch, handmade hot sauce, made specially for you. So if you like hot sauce, you'll love Great White Hot Sauce. It's the hot sauce that bites back. Find it at www.trygreatwhite.com. Where do you rank Aerosmith on your list of greatest American rock and roll bands? And on your list of greatest rock and roll bands ever? Some put them in the top 5, some put them in the top 10. Well, on this episode, we're going to discuss the Bad Boys from Boston and maybe tell you a thing or two you didn't know about them. Or maybe you do. Listen in and find out.
The KOFB studio presents Milk Crates and Turntables, a music discussion podcast hosted by Scott McLean with his co-host Jack Calabrese. Now, let's talk music. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome to the podcast. We're streaming live right now over Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. We ran into some technical difficulties on the live stream. So we're doing a reboot, but you podcast listeners didn't have to worry about that. So right away, let me get right into it and say, if you like this podcast, if you're a listener, share it with a friend that likes music. You know, see how they like it. But we appreciate your time. We appreciate you listening. Like, share. I'll say all that at the end. Scott, the IT guy, gives me my outro. So this episode, we're going to talk about the Bad Boys from Boston, Aerosmith. And without further ado, let me bring on my not-so-bad boy co-host. He's a nice guy, Mr. Jack Calabrese.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
It's
really keen to see you, brother.
Yeah, I haven't seen you in about 7 minutes. So let's get this show started. This is a long conversation, but I want to do let's clean up last episode. I got a couple things I want to clean up. Okay, as far as Ticket to Ride again, right? So, okay, it wasn't a stalker song, and I think you were more in the ballpark. It was an abusive control freak song. Yeah, that's more apropos. Oof.
Apropos.
Yeah, look at me.
This podcast is taking on a whole different level.
I was reading an old Reader's Digest today.
Apropos. Woo.
Yeah, ooh, look at me. And also, we did our 5 favorite albums. Last episode, and because I'm the host of the show and the producer, I'm changing some. Yeah.
Wait a second.
I can do it.
Wait a second. This is an audible. I didn't get this choice.
Because I didn't want to give it to you.
It's my podcast.
It's my podcast, and I'll change if I want to.
Yeah, go
ahead. There's 2 albums that I absolutely love. I'll throw Hole out, although I love that. It's still in my top 10. Hole lived through this. And I'm going to replace it with David Bowie, Young Americans. I think that's his best album. All right. If you ask me, that is his best album. A lot of people say Ziggy Stardust or Diamond Dogs, but I think the beginning of his Blue-Eyed Soul movement, Young Americans, is a perfect album. Then I'm going to take that Nick Cave album was really it really does mean something for me, but I'm just gonna replace it with Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. To Be True, featuring Theodore Pendergrass. That is a great album. Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes.
That is not one that I would have expected from you, but I respect it.
To Be True. It is a great album. Listen to it.
I have it. I love Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, and I love
that album is spot on.
I love Teddy Pendergrass. As a matter of fact, look, I'm not even gonna just bear with me for a second, Scott.
Sound like you're in a mechanic shop. Jesus Christ.
Look, right here.
What's going on with this guy? Teddy
Boy.
Yeah.
Teddy Pendergrass. By the way, speaking of Teddy Pendergrass, I think it's on Showtime. Fantastic documentary on Teddy Pendergrass.
Oh, I'll check it out. I'll have to check it out.
It has to do with guys coming up the hard way and music, obviously, and sex and murder and the mob. It has all types of crazy stuff going on there. It is, as well as, let me ask you this and be honest. Initially, did you think the lead singer was Harold Melvin?
I think we've discussed this. That's always been the thing, Jay Giles. I think we talked about this probably about the 4th episode of our podcast.
It was a long time ago, and I'm an old guy. I don't remember things so much anymore.
It was 18 episodes ago. Yeah. Oh, within the last 18. So let me see. Oh yeah, so there it is, Cole. He didn't get his 5th album. We will have you back on, Cole. We will have you on. You will be able to announce your 5th album. So yeah, I wanted to clean those up. Let's get right into this.
Wait.
Not beat it.
Bobby Vecchio put one word up in the chat section that says Motown. So I have a piece of Motown trivia for you. I actually just learned this myself, so I'm not trying to one up you or anything like that.
Like you always try to do.
But there was, back in 64 through 66, what I would regard as probably one of the very first supergroups that originally recorded an album which was never released for Motown. This is going to blow your mind. The name of the band? The Minor Birds.
The Minor Birds had, hold on. Didn't the Minor Birds have Neil Young?
Yep.
Rick James?
Rick James.
Yeah. I can't remember the other.
Bruce Palmer, who went on to play with Neil Young in Buffalo Springfield, and also Goldie McJohn and Nick St. Nick that went on to Steppenwolf.
Yes, yeah.
A band in utter, obscurity. Not a lot of people know that, but Rick James, he wasn't even called Rick James way back then. I think he was a teenager. I think he was 17 or 18 at the time.
It was Ricky something, I think.
Ricky, yeah.
Like
so,
see?
A little bit of trivia. Very good. I'm very proud of you.
See? That's why I have the podcast.
You have the podcast, and you have that.
That's why I have you on.
You have that Grandpa Morrissey shirt on.
Hey, this is my Christmas in July. I'm wearing a Morrissey Christmas T-shirt for the podcast listeners.
How does Morrissey celebrate Christmas? Oh my God, it's Christmas.
But he doesn't eat turkey or ham.
I hate everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get what I wanted.
So let's get right into the show. Thanks, Bobby Vecchio, for sidelining Jack.
Wait a minute. What's Saturday?
Oh, is Saturday Record Store Day again?
It's Record Store Day again.
Yeah. All right.
So once again, nerds from all over this country will rain down upon your local record store. Pasty white guys in line first thing in the morning in hopes of buying records that you guys probably generally don't care for. But Scott, you should be interested. There's at least one that is going to be really hard to get, which is a box set of vinyl by the Gorillaz.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, and I think there's guy. I think there's only 1,200 copies or something crazy like that. So
that's got to be a couple $100.
Yeah,
I'm sure everything
it's probably 100 and change. But you know what? If you don't get there, it's going to be gone because it's going to be one that's highly sought after. So, one last thing before we get into the old Aerosmith thing. Yeah. Have you seen the ads for the new Paul McCartney, Rick Rubin documentary special?
No.
So I think it's a 6-part series that's going to be on Hulu, filmed in black and white. They're at a recording console, talking about the old stories as well as how things were recorded. They're listening to different things, but there's with Paul McCartney, enough. enough with the Beatles. Come on, move on to something else.
Exactly. Dude, doesn't he have a life?
Hey, come on, Paul. The Beatles, it's enough.
How about
It's
if he
enough.
talks? Why doesn't he ever talk about Wings? How can he?
I'm sure he is going to talk about Wings, but I think it's actually going to be really good because Rick Rubin is, a big kind of honesty guy, and I'm sure that he's going to pull some interesting stories out of it. But come on, the Beatles, enough, Paul. Come on.
Well, he's riding.
How long are you going to ride that wave, Paul?
He's riding it right to the grave. Ringo doesn't do that. That's a good thing about Ringo.
Peace
He
and
kind of
love.
lays low.
Peace and love.
That's it, man. That's it. Ringo and his all-star band. All right, let's get into Aerosmith. Where do you rank Aerosmith in the list of greatest American bands?
They're pretty high up there for me.
Top 5?
Maybe.
Maybe.
But you know what I mean? Long history. For guys like us, or at least guys like me, you got to remember that there's an extra element or two, given the fact that we grew up near and spent a lot of time in Boston, that they seemed somewhat special to us. They were our guys. So not to mention they were not only our guys, but because they were from Boston, it meant that they were around a lot. So, Aerosmith is one of those bands. I honestly think that I've seen Aerosmith 26 or 27 times.
I've seen them once.
So even so much so that I'm going to show you something here, and I apologize, our podcast listeners aren't going to see this, but see what I have in front of me? This is Aero Force One. These are the fan magazines that I used to get, a couple times a year. And if you were in the Aerosmith fan club, which I was, the Aero Force One, and it was originally like, $10 a year and went to 20 or 30 or whatnot. But you would get this on a quarterly basis or whatever that gave you updates on the bands, on the band. You were able to buy different merchandise. Some of the newsletters actually folded out into big giant posters. But the biggest thing, and the big reason why I was a big Air Force One member and stayed a member for a long time, you got to buy tickets before they went on sale to the general public. So of the 26 times that I've seen Aerosmith, I kid you not, 17 of them were in the first 5 rows.
There you go.
Which was pretty cool.
And how many of those was Steven Tyler and Joe Perry smacked out of their minds?
A good chunk of them at the beginning.
Because that is a big part of their history.
It is a big part of their histories. So
you wouldn't put them in the top 5?
I think I would.
You'd have to, I would think.
I think I would.
You put them in there with, I'd say, my list of top 5 would be not necessarily any order. The Eagles, Aerosmith, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I'd put the Doors in there, and I might have to put over a lot of other bands like CCR and groups like that. I'd have to put maybe Pearl Jam in there now. I think they've earned it.
Yeah, I think Pearl Jam is definitely in my top 5. Aerosmith is in my top 5. Tom Petty, definitely in my top 5. I know you're not a big fan, but Bob Dylan, definitely top 5.
But he's an individual. I'm talking a band, a group, a band.
Dude, why are you yelling at me?
Because I don't like Bob Dylan.
You don't like Bob Dylan? Actually, I think that one of the bands that would round out my top 5 is the band.
Over the Eagles?
Yeah.
And over Aerosmith?
I didn't say Aerosmith.
Aren't there some Canadians in that band too?
Wait a minute. Aerosmith is already in there. Yeah, and you could make the argument for that the band was a hybrid band that had some Canadians in it, but that was a band that formed in America.
I think it was this week, but okay. Where would you list them? Greatest bands ever? Would they be top 10?
Yeah, absolutely.
They'd have to be, right?
Absolutely.
So, pretty much they got their start really up in your neck of the woods, New Hampshire, right?
Yep. Sunapee.
They used to play a place called the Barn. Right?
Yeah.
Well, Steven Tyler had been through 5 bands before he met up with Joe Perry and Tom Hamilton.
Yeah,
right?
but for the most part, he was playing in cover bands. And he actually started out as a drummer.
Yeah, he was in a band that actually they had a minor hit or two that they were in a jukebox in the local area, and so Joe Perry and Tom Hamilton actually like idolized him. They were like, oh, that's Steve Perry. That's
Yeah.
Steve Perry.
Steve Tallarico.
Steve Tallarico, yeah. I
Stevie
mean Steven
Tallarico.
Tyler. I didn't say Steve Perry. I mean Steve Tyler.
Steve Tallarico.
Yeah. So then what? They get together.
They get together. They do their thing. They end up moving down to Boston.
To an apartment on Commonwealth Ave.
If I remember, 235 Com. I think
Ave.
235 Com Ave. Joey Kramer was somebody that had played with Steven Tallarico or Steven Tyler. Those guys were both from New York. They were from the Yonkers area. But those guys started kind of doing their thing, playing a lot of high schools, kind of getting their chops, doing their songwriting and whatnot, and ended up getting signed by Columbia, if I remember correctly.
Clive Davis signed him.
Yeah.
He signed him. They done their time. They were getting popular. One of the people from was it Columbia Records had seen them and wanted to really push him. The guy wanted to get behind him, so he sets up a somewhat of an audition showcase at Max's Kansas City.
Yeah,
in New York.
I get a buddy of mine that was actually a waiter there during that time. Big time painter, and he's been around for a long period of time. And he was there. Max's Kansas City was one of the places in New York, and Aerosmith definitely had their showcase and were discovered, so to speak, there.
Well, that night, Clive Davis saw them. He signed them that night.
Yeah.
They didn't even walk out of the club. They were signed.
Yep.
They played their gig. They turned it on, turned it out. So they come up with, their debut album, which people in the New England area have a tendency to call it featuring Dream On.
Well, that's
right?
because the reissue says Aerosmith featuring Dream On.
So that cover right there
is not the original.
Right, but the original cover is that picture.
Yeah, it's an inset into a different one. I have one somewhere around.
Yeah. That the guy that took that picture was a friend of my father's. My father was a photographer around the Boston area for like 50 years. The guy went by English Bob Agropopoulos. He took that picture of Aerosmith. They never paid him.
Those son of a bitches.
Yeah. They never paid him. I think he gets a credit on the album, the original album.
It's down here in like the smallest print ever.
Yeah.
Like
so,
it says, and by the way, you should be impressed. I can still read this without glasses.
We're on a podcast, Jack.
It says cover design Ed Lee, Hiroshima Mozzarati, and front cover photo by Bob Agropopoulos.
Yeah. English
friend
Bob.
of George McClain. Wow.
Yeah. George McClain gets a mention on the podcast.
There he is. Right.
Yeah. He went by English Bob.
So here's the thing about this. Like most people think about Aerosmith's debut album because it has Dream On as being this big monster debut record.
Nah.
It was a complete fucking flop.
Well, they sold about 100,000 copies.
30,000.
No, it was up to 100.
30.
Okay. Anyways, Dream On was a minor hit. It was a minor hit. Now, was Dream On the first power ballad?
It was a minor regional hit.
Yeah. Was that the first power ballad, do you think?
I don't know,
Or was Stairway to Heaven maybe the first power ballad?
Stairway to Heaven was after this.
Was after. That's okay. That's what I thought.
So this album came out in 73.
I think there's an argument to be had for it was the original power ballad.
Yeah. So do you like Dream On?
I've had 3 relationships with Dream On. I loved it. I hated it. I loved it. And hated it. Then I like it again. So that's 5.
Yeah.
No one said I was good at math.
It's one of those songs that is, it's an amazing record, an amazing song. It's been around for a long time, but it's just played so often. It has been played for, old timers like you. You must be just dead tired of it.
What about you?
I'm a lot younger than you are. A lot younger, a lot younger. Plus, the other thing about Dream On, at least for me, was always not anything, at least to me, that stood out live. I don't think that it held up live. It's such a slow cadence. There's not a lot of rhythm to it, obviously, at the beginning.
Well, it's a buildup, like Stairway to Heaven's a build-up. But it never comes down. It keeps going up, and it peaks at the top. It never just it fades down and then ends. That's the beauty of that song.
It kind of goes like this.
Duh. What? Are you just, we take a week off, and are you in a real argumentative mood? It's 100,000, and the song stays at the peak. Okay.
It doesn't. You know what? I'd love to agree with you, but you're fucking wrong. Okay.
Okay. Moving on. So I guess they were told what?
But wait a minute. Before you move on to and I don't even know if you're actually moving on from the record, but Dream On is on this record. But what's your favorite song on this record?
Oof.
So I'll take you through it just real quick. So Make It, Somebody, Dream On, One Way Street, Mama Kin, Write Me, Moving Out, and Walking the Dog.
Oof. I'd say Mama Kin and what's the lead? What's the first track?
Make It.
Yeah, it's got to be Make It, and Mama Kin it's a toss up.
So for me, it's always been One Way Street. I love that.
It's a great song. I mean, it's a great album.
If I put this record on 9 times out of 10, I'm putting it on that song, which actually closes out the first side. One other thing that's kind of interesting about this record is that many, many times Aerosmith has been kind of called the American Stones.
Yeah.
And for a couple of reasons, right? Deeply rooted in American blues, much like the Rolling Stones. There's some similarities in terms of the Toxic Twins with, Mick and Keith. There's almost a similar look to them. But the other thing that's kind of probably unintended is the Rolling Stones' first record and Aerosmith's first record both end with a cover of Walking the Dog.
Interesting.
How is that for utterly useless information?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's totally useless. And they're both 5-piece bands.
Ooh, look at you.
Yep. See? Not to be outdone. Turn your speaker down.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Again, every show, every episode. So then they're told, now don't turn the brightness down. I can still hear myself, but we'll deal with it. Then they're told they need to step it up, and they produce a masterpiece in Get Your Wings, right?
It was really an act of desperation because the Columbia actually wanted to drop them.
Yeah, they said, you better come up with something.
Yeah.
And they did.
They did in a very big way. This for a lot of people, Get Your Wings is a perfect album and a much better album than the debut. By the way, I've never been able to verify this, but there is a rumor that has been going around in the Boston area that, while those guys were somewhat competent in their instruments, that in the first record, Joe Perry doesn't actually play lead guitar on it. They actually brought somebody in to play lead on his behalf. Uncredited, unsubstantiated. My apologies, Joe, but I've heard that story many, many times.
So that is a substantiated rumor, and take it with a grain of salt.
Screw you.
Why are we talking? So then, what they get done with that? We can run through their history, but let's get into some dirt. They blow it out with Toys in the Attic. Then they crush it with Rocks. I mean, it's hard pressed to find a group that pumped out 3 albums like that. Get Your Wings, Toys in the Attic, and Rocks. 3 totally different sounds, which is what makes them a great band. they're able to change their style. You know, that Rocks is like almost like a heavy blues rock, driving, whereas Toys in the Attic was more alive, and Get Your Wings was more like it hit your senses. Like you listen to it on headphones, and they really dug deep into you with Get Your Wings.
Yeah,
So
Get Your Wings, at least to me, still had like elements.
my favorite album by them.
Yeah, to me, it still had a lot of elements. That, there was still a little bit of the British invasion in there. Especially with Train Kept a Rolling, they were reminiscent of the Yardbirds, at least to me.
That's my favorite cutoff. That always has been. I mean, "Woman of the World" is a great song, but "Train Kept a Rolling" was the one that caught me when I was a kid. That one, I actually won that album on a radio call-in dial phone. Yeah, when it first came out. I think it was WVBF in Boston.
WVBF.
It was AM.
Holy crap!
Yeah, you
sure
were
it wasn't WRKO.
Hey, I remember my radio stations,
I'm
buddy.
just asking you. I'm sorry.
I
You're
was a
yelling at
music
me.
nerd.
There's a lot of tension going back and forth on this show. It's like I'm Steven Tyler and you're Joe Perry. We're just bitching.
I'll take that. Yeah, I'll take that. Joe Perry's way cooler than Steven Tyler.
Yeah. Steven Tyler is not cool at all.
No, I said Joe Perry's way cooler than Steven Tyler. Steven Tyler's he's like a clown.
Oh, wait a minute. Maybe we should reverse this. Who is the guy on this podcast that actually likes to dress up in clown makeup?
Did Ebola the clown? What are you talking about? Find his video on YouTube. Anyways.
Plug.
So Rocks goes platinum, right? Hits the top 10. Great album. I believe this is where Brad Whitford starts kind of injecting. He helped write Last Child.
Yes, he did.
Or he wrote it. He actually wrote
it.
Last Child.
Wrote it.
He
Great
wrote what else? He's written 3 great songs for them. 1 off of Toys in the Attic, 2 off of Rocks. Can't think of it at the top of my head. But yeah, so Rocks hits, right? And then they jump into, well, Toys in the Attic was an interesting album. So Toys in the Attic, they recorded that in Times Square. Yeah. And Sweet Emotion, there's lyrics in Sweet Emotion that refer to Joe Perry's girlfriend at the time. He would take her on the road everywhere. Like he was like this monogamous guy. He wasn't in the boys club. You would think that he'd be, rock and roll, God. But he liked just hanging with his girlfriend. He was low key, laid back, started driving a little wedge into the band.
She was the Yoko Ono of Aerosmith.
Well, there was a couple of Yoko Onos in Aerosmith. There was a couple of them. So, Steven Tyler hated her. He couldn't stand her. So he throws in Sweet Emotion, Talk About Things That Nobody Cares, was referring to her because he said she wouldn't shut the fuck up. She's always yapping. And Can't Say Baby Where I'll Be in a Year is a reference to him basically saying, I can't get far enough away from you. He married his first wife because Joe Perry's girlfriend then wife, didn't like her. So he's like, then I'm going to marry her. That's how much the hate was. And that between these wives, then they didn't like each other. So you had a lot of Yoko Ono stuff going on there.
But you talk about Joe Perry wanting to spend time with his girl, and hey, look, I get that. Being on the road, I would imagine, is crazy, crazy tough, and there's only so much partying you can do with a bunch of goofballs. And to your point, Steven Tyler, as cool as Steven Tyler might be, I have no doubt when they were on the road, the guy never shut the fuck up.
I'm sure.
And anything that he was talking about was more than likely all about Steven Tyler.
Yeah.
Plus, if you kind of peel back the layers, I would imagine, and I don't know either of them, and I'm not a psychologist, But I look at Steven Tyler as being this incredible extrovert that just wants the limelight and wants to talk and wants to kind of capitalize on the conversation. And I look at Joe Perry as being an introvert and wanting that quiet time.
Well, that's the lead singer, right?
Yeah.
That's a lead singer.
Yes, it is.
They used to be in front and center. So they were putting that album together, and Joe Perry plays a lick in the studio. Steven Tyler starts hitting the drums, and they're like, this is something. But they can't think of any lyrics. Can't think of any lyrics. Can't think of any lyrics. So one night they go out to a late show in Times Square to see Young Frankenstein of all movies. And the first time Steven Tyler hears Marty Feldman, Igor, say, walk this way.
Walk this way.
He said, those are the lyrics. Right there. Those are the lyrics. He went back and wrote that song in 2 hours.
I have to tell you that's one of the things that I appreciate about the first iteration of Aerosmith. I thought that Steven Tyler was an incredible songwriter in terms of the way that he strung together lyrics. He wrote cool lyrics, came up with really interesting phrases that he utilized, much like, you know, who was good at that in kind of a different way was Ringo Starr. You know, Ringo Starr came up with "It's Been a Hard Day's Night" or "A Day in the Life." You know, he came up with those little nuggets that people played off of. But Steven Tyler is a great songwriter.
Ringo Starr came up with the line off of Badge with Cream of watching the swans in the park or something like that.
Wouldn't be surprised.
He did, yeah. He was just sitting with them. He's like, this sounds good. So they punch that out, and then they move on to Rocks. Oh, by the way, Walk This Way is widely kind of considered the first rap song. It is. I mean, if you look back at rock and roll, then you look at the, you know, rap and back in that day, it was all rhyme. He rhymed everything in that. So they say and I think that's why Rick Rubin said, "Hey, let's jump this." Which, fast forward, we could get into that. But then they move on to after Rocks, the beginning of the end of the first incarnation of Aerosmith starts with Draw the Line. It's a good album, not a great album, probably the worst album in that group of albums.
You're wrong. Well, in that group, but you get
that group of albums. That, like I said, the first incarnation of them.
No, there's one more after that. After Draw the Line.
I said this is the beginning of how they started to fade. But okay, then what's the next album?
Night in the Ruts.
Okay, that was the bomb, right? That bombed.
You know, on Draw the Line, and I agree with you, Draw the Line is a weaker album in comparison to its predecessors. But it did have the song Draw the Line. It did have the song Kings and Queens, which were modest hits. And again, you got to remember that you and I are looking through this history through our lens, through the Boston history. So we probably are somewhat biased in that they got a lot more airplay and were around a lot more and probably got a little bit of a pass to a certain extent. But Night in the Ruts after, not a good record.
No. All right. I'll give you that. But so Draw the Line was probably the beginning of it because you can see they started losing their oomph.
Yeah, but why did they lose their oomph? You know, I think for a lot of bands in the 70s, Relentless, you got to remember that you know, music was not the way that it is right now. Music back then was record, tour, record, tour, record, tour, record, tour. It was relentless. It was a day job. It was a 9-to-5 thing, but
they loved doing it. So it wasn't like they were on a grind.
Hey, it's better than being in the insurance industry. You know, but I think being on the road and whatnot, I think that one of the reasons why Draw the Line was the album that it was because, you know, just exhaustion and the drugs really started to become a problem, and I think they had writer's block.
Well, you see that in a lot of bands.
Yeah, I
Bands that
agree.
we've talked about, they'll burn up. They'll punch out 5 great albums, and then you start hitting it. But there's distraction involved. They're motivated until they become successful. Then once they're successful, they go into some sort of cruise control, and the drugs started really taking that band over. The drugs is what started their downfall. So after Night in the Ruts, which they were, I believe, wasn't that the tour that Steven Tyler passed out on stage?
No,
That
didn't happen until Joe Perry left.
Okay, so Joe Perry leaves when?
So Joe Perry leaves pretty much right after Night in the Ruts. So they're on tour, and there's a big fight, and the women were absolutely involved.
Yeah. It was literally over spilt milk. One of
It
them
was
threw a
literally
glass of milk at the other one. Yeah.
You are absolutely right. It was literally over spilt milk. It wasn't the guys that were fighting. I think this was, one of those situations. I think.
Well, Joe Perry, after that was in Cleveland, and Joe Perry just said, "Fuck it, I'm done. I'm out. And he left. He left that night, and he never talked to them for like years.
Yeah.
He went with the Joe Perry project. Aerosmith brings in another guitarist.
They bring in Jimmy Crespo and Rick Dufay.
Well, Rick Dufay ends up, Brad Whitford, the quietest one of them all. He's waiting around to do another album. He's like, fuck it, I'm out too. I'm leaving. That's when they bring in Rick Dufay.
Yeah. Brad Whitford goes out to form Whitford St. Holmes. So whatever his name is, St. Holmes was actually the lead singer for Ted Nugent.
Before Ted Nugent's ego took over and said, I can sing Wango Tango too.
Yeah, that's right. And those guys went out on tour. I you know what? I can't even remember who it was, but I saw them open for a couple of bands. They were not a good band.
No, I wouldn't think so. But Brad Whitford has to be one of the most underrated guitar players in rock history.
Oh yeah, talk about living in somebody's shadow.
But he doesn't care. He went to Berkeley. He was a guitar player. He was, he came in. You had Joe Perry in that kind of Keith Richards sloppy but great, and then you have Brad Whitford tight. Everything's tight, and it just played well together, like Ron Wood or Mick Taylor and Keith Richards.
Well, you talk about I think you're right. You talk about the unsung heroes of Aerosmith. Joe Perry and Steven Tyler get all of the press and all of the accolades and all of that. But if you look at, Whitford and Joey Kramer and Tommy Hamilton, what an amazing, rhythm section and rhythm guitar play. Just unbelievable, man.
Yeah. So then they come out with Rockin' a Hard Place. It hits number 37.
No.
What, after Night in the Ruts?
No.
What was after Night in the Ruts?
Done with Mirrors.
Oh, see, I've never even acknowledged that album. So again, you got me there. Yeah.
So done with Mirrors.
Fucking horrible.
Oh, wait a minute. No, you're right. Rockin' a Hard Place was first. I apologize.
See, I give you the benefit of the doubt, and you just, are you purposely sabotaging this episode? I mean, I know what I'm talking about, but you made me second guess myself. What is wrong with me?
I'm sorry, Scott. I apologize.
It hits number 37 on the charts. I'm like, I know these things.
Scott,
what?
Scott,
What?
I'm really sorry.
See, you're putting me on a Night in the Ruts tonight, buddy.
So the Rockin' a Hard Place. So this is with the new lineup. No Joe Perry.
They couldn't fill 1,000-seat arena in Hartford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
They couldn't. Like, people weren't going to see them.
Look at even Joey Kramer at this time was in his Michael Anthony phase, right?
Oh, that's a good call. He looks just like him.
So a bunch of us actually went and saw Aerosmith. They played at the Worcester Centrum. Pat Travers was the opening band. No Joe Perry. They sounded terrible. And like 70 minutes into the show, Steven Tyler passed out on stage, and that was
Was it even that long into it? I don't even.
yeah,
I don't think it was that.
It was a ways into it, but he was down and out. It was during Train Kept a Rolling, and the band kept going.
I could have swore he was hanging. Yeah, he was hanging on Tom Hamilton, and he shoved him away, like, get the fuck away from me, and he goes down, and there's actually video of Hamilton looking down at him while Tyler's just done. And they just said, that's all. They grabbed the mic. They said, that's all, folks.
Yeah, the band, finished out the rest of the song, just played it kind of instrumental to where it came to kind of like a natural conclusion. And that was the end of it. No explanation. It was a real disappointment. And then the next day in the Herald, I think it was, they actually claimed that Steven Tyler had food poisoning.
Yeah. Food
I didn't realize cocaine was a food.
Yeah. Or heroin, whatever it was. Rick Dufay, the one that replaces Brad Whitford, literally told Steven Tyler, you need to get back with Joe Perry. This isn't working. Like, this guy could have, I give him 1,000% credit. This guy could have rode a little wave there, although they were crashing out. But he could say, hey, I was with Aerosmith. It's musicians are funny like that, right? But he's like, dude, you suck without him.
But I'll tell you, the funny thing is, at least for me, Rock in a Hard Place, while not a great record, I actually thought was a better record than the last one with Joe Perry, Night in the Ruts. I mean, Jailbait was on it, and Lightning Strikes was a pretty modest hit, pretty heavily played on MTV. And I thought it was a pretty good song.
Then in '85, they get a new manager, Done with Mirrors. Right, comes out, peaks at number 70, and then guess what creeps back into the band? Drugs. So they were on their way now. That's the second incarnation of them, post Joe Perry. Well, Perry comes back, right?
Yep.
And then they get the biggest, in '88, they get the biggest unexpected break, I think, in the history of rock and roll. They get a call from Rick Rubin, said, hey, I got this rap group, Run DMC. You guys want to be in? Let's do a collaboration. Again, Joe Perry's like, fuck, we got nothing to lose. Because Perry had come back now. He'd come back. Joe Perry project was an epic fail. Started off good.
Couple of good songs.
In the local area, in the Boston area.
Yeah, a couple of good songs here and there, but nothing to really speak of.
No.
And no real charisma in that band.
Wasn't this hit song around Boston? Wasn't it called Balloon or something like that?
So you had what's his name? Charlie Farron was the lead singer for a little while. They actually had two lead singers. I can't remember the name of the first one, but the second Joe Perry album was Listen to the Rock and Roll, which was a Charlie Farron song that, you're right, you're absolutely right, was in a band called Balloon. And then actually went on to play in a band called The Enemy. Great voice. By the way, just as a sidetrack, if you can ever find the Fahrenheit album, the Charlie Farron, the one record that they put out, is actually pretty good.
Okay. All right. So they go in the studio, they do Walk This Way with Run DMC, and Aerosmith gets introduced to the MTV generation.
Yeah.
Let's start phase number 3, of Aerosmith.
So this is the more, for some people, the more controversial part of the Aerosmith history, because this is when they stop writing their own material to a certain extent.
So that's, that starts up. So Steven Tyler, they all go sober. They decide we got to do this as a team. Their new manager says, you guys got to get sober. Everybody has to get sober. They have an intervention with Tyler. I guess it was under the guise of a conference call to Japan. He shows up and fingers stop pointing, the whole thing.
They,
He goes-
they generally say that an intervention lasts an hour or two.
Oh, that one didn't.
10 hours.
Yeah, it was insane.
10 hours.
Yeah, yeah. So he went into rehab for 48 days. Now, I've been to rehab, right? And I was in for 3 weeks. That shit, thank God it worked, but that shit was long. 3 weeks was a long time to be in rehab.
And he was there.
48 days.
Holy Moses.
Yeah, so I was there for 3 weeks. What's that, 21 days? So he was more than double the time I did. So I know what that's all about. That shit ain't fun.
Yeah.
But it worked because
Is it safe to say that he was in a little bit of a different rehab place than you were?
Yeah, probably. I would assume so.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine was a little more intense. Well, no, you know what? Maybe the facility was different, but rehab is rehab. It's intense.
And you know what? Bravo to you for doing that. And I know you've been sober for a long time.
30 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. But rehab is rehab. It's intense. It's very intense. It's emotional. There's a lot of epiphanies. But it's up to you. I guess that's another conversation for another time. Thank God he stuck with it. I stuck with it, and he went on to bigger success. But
you both did.
we
Look
both did.
Look
Yeah.
where you're at right now.
Yeah, I can honestly say if I kept drinking, I probably would have been divorced, and I probably wouldn't have had the career I had I kept drinking.
I'm glad you had the courage and the commitment to do what you did.
Yeah, yeah. It's a pretty intense story. I don't know if I ever told you. I'll tell you sometime.
Sounds good.
A long talk.
I will intently listen. I'll only interrupt it periodically.
With what? What's with the what space is it? Negative space?
It's the negative space.
The negative space. So
Jack,
okay.
Jack, I was in rehab for 3 weeks. See how that works? Isn't that good?
Are you mocking my rehab?
I
Are you trying to put me off the wagon?
I am not mocking your
Am
rehab.
I gonna fucking fall off the wagon now? I mean, you're shredding me tonight.
I'm not shredding you at all.
I'm in a volatile situation right here, and you're not encouraging me.
So this is going to be your negative space later. 30 years of sobriety down
Thanks to Jack.
down the drain.
Yeah, thanks.
Fucking Jack. How's that for negative space?
So he gets out. They come out with Permanent Vacation in '86. Huge album.
Huge.
Big videos. That's where he sits down. Steven Tyler finally opens up and says, there you go, as Jack holds it up to the viewing audience. Steven Tyler finally decides, you know what, I'm going to write. I'm going to have a co-writer. He's going to write with some outside of the band. So he brings in Desmond Child, and they come up with Dude Looks Like a Lady. Huge hit.
Huge.
Right? Big hit. And he said, Steven Tyler was quoted as saying, that gave me a whole new career because now I have the ability and the patience to write with somebody outside the band.
Yeah.
Well,
Desmond St. Child, proven, he was a hit master, right?
Yeah. Hot Child in the City.
So they brought in, hired guns and whatnot. And the Aerosmith received a little bit of criticism as a result. But at the end of the day, like people like you and me may criticize them. Oh, the band is different. That it's not coming from their heart and soul. They're bringing in hired guns and whatnot. But 99.9% of the people that are listening out there, they don't give a shit.
No.
They just want to hear good music. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Again, above average music listeners, So Scott, the IT guy, deciding to jump in with Jack and mock my my rehab and my 30 years sobriety
He's
decides
not
to
mocking your rehab.
message
No,
in.
let's not get dramatic there, Joe Berry.
Scott, the IT guy, says, drink free, sober for 30 years, and I can't stay sober for 3 minutes of this vlogcast. He's definitely not getting hot sauce money. Definitely, definitely not. You guys did you both get together? Did you know I was going to come clean and just throw my soul out to the world and say I was in a rehab?
No, it's not a matter of you throwing your, saying that you were in rehab. It's the fact that you're piggybacking on Aerosmith throwing themselves in a rehab.
Oh, so now you're saying I'm piggybacking?
I'm totally kidding.
Yeah, I do it for ratings. I'm doing this for the I don't know, 50 downloads a week we get.
We did 20 episodes of this podcast, and then I had to go to rehab, and then I brought in Desmond St. Childs to help me write the script to the next rehab.
Yeah, I think I'm looking for a new IT guy.
So can I ask you something, Scott?
Sure.
And I think this is kind of a fair question, although I'm kind of making it up on the spot. At the beginning of the show, you and I had talked about where does Aerosmith place in rock and roll history, both on the American side and then from a world stage standpoint, right?
Right.
We both ranked them pretty high. Would you, when you put that ranking together, do you put that ranking together based upon the first 5 or 6 albums, or is it the collective history?
Dude, they've been together for 50 years.
I get
they
that.
never broke up. They had a couple of substitutes. So just that alone. Now, if you take their first album up to Draw the Line, which I'll give Draw the Line a little credit.
Yeah,
I'm not trashing the album. I do like Kings and Queens is my favorite song on that album.
It's a great song.
And I still listen to that today.
Great song.
So you take those albums, then you just kind of, dust off the other ones in between. And when they pick it up with Permanent Vacation, from that point on, they went right back to the top. They never
But let me ask you this. Let's take the first 5 albums out of rotation. Take the first 8 albums out of rotation, right? So if you look at Aerosmith's musical history from Permanent Vacation on, are they the legendary band that is in your top 5 and my top 5? Or is it a different band? I know it's an odd question. It's just, to me, Aerosmith has 2 big chapters. In the first chapter is kind of organic, and it's bluesy, and it's gritty, and it's dirty. And that's the thing that we loved about Aerosmith, is that they were a working class band from a working class city that put out great music. And then they had their downfall. And then the second iteration of the band, they were a highly produced songwriting teams brought in, MTV, media sensation, different thing.
They were run like a corporation after a while.
Yeah.
Which they deserved that because they were losing a lot of money. Their first two, the 2 guys that managed them at first, they get 50% of Dream On and all these other, right. And Steven Tyler is like, I have to split it with 5 people.
Yeah.
Between 5 of us.
Yeah.
They signed the bad deal,
Yeah, like most people did,
so if you look at it,
did back in the day.
Throw out Night in the Ruts, throw it out. Throw out Rockin' a Hard Place in 82, and throw out Done with Mirrors. But they did put out records, so I'll give them. So then you pick up with Permanent Vacation, huge. Pump, huge. Get a Grip, huge, right? Now, they weren't like, they didn't have ghostwriters. Steven Tyler was still involved in the writing process.
Yeah,
right?
but as time went by, they used the hired writers more and more and more.
That's why Steven Tyler said, I had a whole new career.
Yeah.
So it was actually a smart move. So
absolutely.
I mean, if you want to be a purist and say, a group doesn't write its own music doesn't deserve to be considered in greatness.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is it's in a way it's actually kind of two different bands and two different methodologies. And I will also say that two different bands in that, I saw the band, I saw Aerosmith a handful of times before they broke up, right? So I saw them on the Rocks tour and I saw them on the Draw the Line tour and whatnot. They were an okay live band, and you have to kind of take into consideration the times. We were seeing those shows at the Boston Garden, which had horrible acoustics. The technology wasn't there, and those guys were on drugs. They were a far better live band when they got sober and the technology had caught up and they were playing at places that were a little bit more acoustically and sonically put together for those types of performances. How do you like that?
Absolutely. But a lot of groups benefited from that too. So the Rolling Stones benefited from that. I mean, you could say all those groups from the 70s benefit, if they were still around, to enjoy that technology and the things that, so there was groups in the 80s like, I don't know, Soft Cell could never tour because when they did Tainted Love, they'd have to bring like 17 or, like synthesizers and, whatever, Today they just bring in a keyboard,
You always got to bring up the synthesizer, don't you?
I love synthesizers.
I know you do.
Say it.
Cynthy Lauper.
There you go. That's my boy. So I still, so if you look at their albums, so then you jump to,
but the first and second, like when you're listening to Aerosmith, right? Do you ever pick up Pump or Permanent Vacation or Just Push Play? Do you listen to those records?
No, because I hit that point where, like the first albums, you heard it so much, it was saturated everywhere. Even on MTV, when you had the three videos with Alicia Silverstone.
Yeah,
right.
And Liv Tyler.
Yeah. Alicia Silverstone was in all three, though. I think Liv Tyler was in one or two, but she was like, she was the queen of. They call her Aerosmith girl, right?
Which was smart.
She was just starting out.
Which was really smart. People love that type of continuity.
Yeah, it was a good move. So I think, hey, listen, if they had earned they had got their wings, they deserve to have that. That little bit of luxury.
Yeah.
But
there were just some of those songs that were crafted intentionally for the commercial market kind of got on my nerves a little bit. Like Ragdoll.
Big hit.
Yeah, big hit, but just not my favorite stuff. I don't know. Just didn't do it for me.
It's like, how do you define them? Do you define them by Dream On, Walk This Way, Ragdoll, Janie's Got a Gun, Jaded, Girls of Summer, Don't Want to Miss a Thing? I mean, how do you, there's such a big dichotomy in all those songs.
Well, the cool thing is that they actually kind of transcended generations, to a certain extent.
They had that
first iteration of, people that loved Aerosmith, and then they had a whole new generation that they opened themselves up to that thought that that's what Aerosmith was, and didn't really even know the first couple of records.
So I compare that to 2007, I believe. Around that time, I'm in Philadelphia seeing U2, the best U2 song concert I had seen to date, and they're about to play bad, and Bono message, he says something to the crowd. He goes, we played this at Live Aid, and these two girls next to me, I swear that this is no lie. The girl looks at the other girl and says, "What's Live Aid?" I said, I couldn't make that up. I looked, I said, "Oh, good Lord," right? So that's Aerosmith. U2 transcended generations. Aerosmith transcended generations.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these kids from the 80s that probably never listened to Mama Kin or Make It
Sure.
or their first album or the second album. It's actually, those are two totally different sounds.
Yeah.
They're raw in rock and roll in the 70s and 80s. Well, the beginning. That second incarnation, well, the second incarnation was drugs. They sucked. Third incarnation, Back from the Dead, Lazarus.
Yeah.
They take off, and their music is more popish. They were a corporation. They needed to make some money. They wanted to make money.
They were a corporate band. There's even there's an.
And they went along with it. They had no problem with it.
Well, here's the thing that Steven Tyler actually said. He said this in an interview. He was like, look, we love Lovin' an Elevator and Ragdoll and stuff like that. They're great songs, but you know what? We brought in writers for that. We wanted to make sure that we had the hits and they could stay, popular. But the things that we really like to play are the deep cuts on those records.
Yeah.
Like Monkey on My Back or Eat the Rich, are really more reminiscent of the first iteration of Aerosmith. If you listen to Pump, if you listen to Just Push Play, or if you listen to Permanent Vacation, there are all the songs that you heard on MTV or on the radio, that were really the pop songs. But hidden between those songs are a lot of kind of gritty rockers that didn't actually get that type of airplay, that are really more reminiscent of the music that Aerosmith loved to play.
Yeah, and it didn't get played because times change.
Yeah.
Radio changes. Yeah. MTV changed everything. That they had that, excuse me. They had the what was it? Was it the Grammys? Where Steven Tyler gets lowered from the ceiling with the piano, playing Dream On.
He may have done it at the Grammys, but I happened to be in the audience. They actually did MTV's 10th anniversary, and they had a number of different bands that played from different venues. And we were at the Wang Center in Boston, where they had Michael Kamen in a full orchestra, and Steven Tyler was sitting in a grand piano up in the air.
That's probably the one I saw then. Yeah.
And Joe Perry kind of, breaks into, the riff, the Dream On riff. And Steven Tyler is playing and actually comes from the ceiling.
That's
and
what
comes
I saw.
down.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing about that show. So they did Dream On like 4 or 5 times.
Okay.
Because they were filming it for the video for MTV's 10th anniversary, right? The tickets were free. They were given away by WBCN. If you were the right caller and you brought in a can of food or whatnot, you actually were able to get in. And they did that 4 or 5 times as I remember it. And then they just jammed for a little while. They played like 4 or 5 different songs. And there was one moment, because I was right up front, where Steven Tyler went over to Joe Perry while Joe Perry was playing. And I don't know what Steven Tyler said to Joe Perry, but Joe Perry turned around and lashed at him and said, "I'm having fucking fun."
Not aired on the show.
Not aired on the show. But a kind of a great night. And really kind of an interesting thing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jen locked this message in. Born in early 80s, parents made sure I grew up listening to everything, and I listened to all of Aerosmith, and they are one of the best bands of all time. I love that they changed up their sounds all the time.
Yeah.
So she's the product of musical parents that loved music, and I'm sure they made her listen to featuring Dream On and Get Your Wings and Toys in the Attic, because any true Aerosmith fan would go back and listen to those. Whereas I'm sure there's a lot of kids that just took it from Pump and really never looked back, Which is how many people really go back at a Fleetwood Mac catalog?
Prior to
here we
go.
go.
Not rumors, but the record, the Fleetwood Mac record before.
Yeah, their self-titled record.
But I agree with your point in that there are many people out there that think Fleetwood Mac is Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, and there was a decade essentially before that with Peter Green, where they were a blues band, where there were no women in the band.
So again, they transcended generations, which makes them. It has to make them one of the greatest rock bands ever.
Yeah, I agree.
The Eagles didn't transcend the generations like Aerosmith did. pick any, there's a very few bands that did it. The Rolling Stones did it. The Who didn't really do it. Led
No.
Zeppelin didn't really. Led Zeppelin they're an enigma. They're a thing in their own, But
Yeah, I mean, Led Zeppelin really didn't have not truly. They didn't have a second act, so to speak.
Right.
In the Who kind of had a failed second act, if you will. Some great songs, but once Keith Moon died, and once those guys were struggling with drugs and whatever demons they were dealing with at the time, they, at least in my opinion, the Who never put out another great record. There were a couple of great songs here and there,
Yeah.
but not much beyond that.
Pete Townsend had a second, had a rebirth.
Yeah,
when he
and
got-
somewhat underrated. I think that Pete Townsend solo stuff is largely overlooked.
Yeah, I agree. Good stuff. Well, I'm waiting for Scott, the IT guy, to send us the outro. Evidently,
Did you ever realize that Aerosmith "Done with Mirrors"? Do you know what it means?
no. Oh, cocaine.
They were done with mirrors.
Yeah. All right, so good show. I think we really skipped over a lot. If we really wanted to get into this would be a 2-hour show. It really would be.
Well, you're talking about a band with an awful lot of history.
Yeah. I think we touched on pretty much most of it. And again, Aerosmith is one of those bands. There's not, like when we covered Led Zeppelin, it's not going to be anything that really, we're not digging out something that no one ever knew, No,
maybe a couple of things.
I think I'll, some little side stories, and Did You Know is always good, but they're a pretty popular band that everybody pretty much,
Do you know who was instrumental in helping putting them back together? Mark Parento
from WBCN, the 2 to 10,
WBCN
2 to
in
6,
Boston. Yep.
2 to 6, right? 2 to 6. All right. Well, listen, Scott, the IT guy, just sent me my outro. That's it, everyone. Thanks for watching. And if you like this podcast, like and subscribe, and tell a friend. I'm winging it now. I'm going off script. I'm sure he's pounding shots as I do this.
Well, he put out your script up there. It's up there.
Yeah, I'm winging it.
Sorry.
Because you weren't see.
I didn't realize you was. I didn't realize you was scatting over there.
Wait, so making fun of me going to rehab in my sobriety wasn't enough. Wasn't enough.
I didn't
have to. You had to jump in at the very end.
I did not and would not make fun of you going to rehab.
I know. Listen, that was all. I was just piggybacking off of Steven Tyler. Don't worry about it. All right, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you, and you'll listen to us next week. Hang in there, Jack. Hang on.